Hi, I'm Peter Foott, and this is Be Inspired for BBC Writers. I just love to write. It's one of those things. I get up in the morning and I get my coffee and I sit down at 6 a.m. and I write for a couple of hours, and then I take my kids to school and I come back and I write again. And it's, I think at this point now is just as much me as anything is. If I stopped writing, I don't know what a part of my life I'd fill it with, you know. I think from a young age, I've always been creating something. I used to draw a lot up until I was in my late teens, and then I started to write, and that took over from the drawing. And it's just this thing of being able to do something and saying, like, even if, like I said, even if the stuff wasn't getting made, I'd probably be writing stories that wouldn't get read or get made into anything. I'd just still be doing it. Yeah, so I had this writer, Onan Harris, in school, and he was sort of like a writing mentor to me, and he basically, first of all, he was quite he was intimidating because he'd come in and he'd basically tell you some kind of really like scary story about something he'd done just to get your attention. And make us all, like, if you were late to his class, he'd kill you, basically, he'd murder you. So you'd all be sitting down waiting for his class. But he has so many good tips. But there's one thing that he had, which I always thought was great. Well, there's two I'll tell you about. There's one, which was when I first got a bit of money to write. Someone had said, look, here's 10 grand to go and shoot a pilot, a half-hour pilot, and you can go write it, you can do whatever you want. I was like over the moon. I was like, so I was spending ages writing, and I told him about it, and I said it, and he said, what are you going to do it on? And he says, oh, I can do whatever I want. And he says, oh, you're fucked. He said, there's no way you're going to ever finish writing that. And then I said, no, I will, I definitely will. And then I had to keep going back to him and never finished it and never made it. And that was that. And the second thing he had was, he had this part of a script, and I'm sure there's other script kind of doctors out there and script gurus have different phrases for this, but it really taught me something. Like in Act 1, and I still look for this in the script. He had this thing called the necessity clause that he called the necessity clause, and it basically was, you have your character kind of, they're called to adventure. They're going to go on this adventure, but they're not sure about it. They're debating about this adventure. And then something happens that forces them to go on this adventure, and he called that the necessity clause. And I always think, like, that's something I look for when I'm writing a script. I say, what is that going to be? What's the necessity clause? Because once they're forced to go on this journey, then you're really behind them. Writing a film, I suppose, is different to a TV show because one ends. That's basically like you write a movie and you go, okay, this is over now, theoretically. I mean, that didn't happen for us, but like you can write it and feel like there's a sense of completion, whereas a TV show, there isn't that sense of completion. And I think in a great way, you've got to think in terms of leaving the story open, whereas in a film, you can close it off. So the other thing with it is that, like, TV shows, a lot of TV shows have all these kind of character arcs that are weaving in together. And I think maybe just because I didn't feel confident in how to do that, I decided I'd just do what I know, and I decided to make The Young Offenders just lots of little movies. So basically every episode was a movie that started, had a middle and an end, and I wrote them so they all tied together, but they're very much like standalones. So in a way, all I did was I took what structure I knew from a movie and then just tightened it all up and said, right, well, here are all the beats. Let's see which ones we can do without, and then try and make a half hour out of it. Sometimes a series just demands to be freshened up anyway, whether you like it or not. Like I suppose we went from doing the movie to the TV show, and we had to transform it into a TV show because the movie wouldn't have worked in its structure. So we had to rethink how, like, the movie was quite a big story. Like there's drug dealers and there's like, they're going on this big adventure. Whereas if we tried to do that for series 1 of the TV show, they're going on in a big adventure and everything like would run out of steam pretty quickly. So I suppose I decided to make the show, bring it back and say, well, what is it about? It's about two teenager lads who are basically just trying to get by and trying to like Cork City's their playground. They're out having fun, and also I'm a big fan of rom-coms. So why don't we have like there's the stakes, basically bring the stakes smaller than what the movie was. So that the stakes are like, will this girl's parents like me, are what the stakes are, which are huge for a teenager. But so that in a way freshened it up for the series. And then once we had that done, it was like, okay, now how's that going to grow out of that into something else? And we basically said, right, well, we've got kids, we've got these teenagers now, and one of them has got someone pregnant, they've got a child, and that's going to change that storyline. And by the time we got to series 4, like so much time had passed, we had to reinvent it. So I said, right, well, what if they're all gone to prison, and we'll bring them back from prison because we need a time jump in it. So I suppose like that in a way, lockdown had forced us to take a break. So that forced us to freshen it up in a way. So I think sometimes the circumstances of the show itself and what's happening with the cast will force you to make changes, and it's just to roll with them. I think a lot of this stuff is, everyone's heard it a million times, but I would stick to writing about characters, you know, like particularly for comedy. It's so important just to write about people and why they are the way they are and why they act the way they are. That's really, for me, like what's funny is watching how certain people deal with certain situations, and then trying to understand why they do it. And I think like once, like if you're writing that stuff, it will work on no matter how big the screen is. And also if you're getting frustrated about getting stuff made and thinking that like you really just won't ever get commissioned, because to be honest, these days, very few people are ever going to get commissioned because it's getting harder and harder, then just whip out your phone and just shoot the thing, you know? Like that's like the phones we have these days, you can shoot pretty much anything with them. So that would be my advice. Yeah, I think directing definitely helps my writing. I think I think a lot of people say this when they do a couple of jobs, but I don't think of there being any difference between writing the script and directing and editing. Like I'm constantly writing. So the directing is just another part of the writing for me. It's not a different job. I write the script, and then at some point when I'm through the process, someone changes what they call me. That's basically what it is. I'm still doing the same job, and then all of a sudden someone's calling me the writer, the director, and sometimes I'm the editor. So you get in and now you're the editor, but I'm still doing the same job, you know? I think like, obviously I do comedy. So the likes of Steve Martin, I loved all his stuff growing up. I think I liked him as an actor, and then you find out that he's writing all this stuff, and then there's the Monty Python, obviously, and The Simpsons. I loved just watching The Simpsons. I think The Simpsons probably had a huge influence on the young offenders. The shape of the stories, they're all like little movies, and that's kind of what I loved. And then there's other people like Shane Black, who've done like all the Lethal Weapon movies, which, you know, I kind of grew up in the 90s, so they were big to me as well. Do you know what's a weird one? Are the Bourne movies. Like, for some reason I think because they're so complicated, I go back to them, I've forgotten what the storyline was, but I love the Bourne movies. I watched them. I think like, I'm a huge Jim Carrey fan, so I'd probably take a bunch of Jim Carrey movies with me. And in terms of TV, I'm trying to think what TV I'd watch again. Like probably The Simpsons. I love The Simpsons. Yeah.